All right, we've got massive patch notes. We're going to talk about the nerf to not only Leech and Lockjaw and Shuri. We're going to talk about June and some amazing cards that are coming out in the Spider patch. We're also going to talk about the clarifications on Kitty Pryde, who everybody's going to be getting for free in a month, and the changes to her and how that is going to interact. And also we've got some developer comments. So we're going to have a lot of information here to unpack. This looks absolutely busted. Spider Ham on reveal, transform the highest card cost in your opponent's hand into a pig, keeping its power and cost, and they will convert into a pig and it'll say oink. So this is like, this looks like a busted card, absolutely busted card. Basically, imagine that like your highest cost card in your hand is Devil Dino. Now it's just a 5/3. The ongoing abilities, it's basically a single card leech that is targeting whatever is the highest in card cost in your opponent's hand, which could be death. Death is going to be there and it's going to ruin death. Death will be unplayable. This is going to be a very, very big card. Now we're going to go over all of the spider cards that we know about, but before I move on, I want to talk about Nebula, and that this card has seen several changes in the data mine. And the reason why that's important is that I'm looking at this Spider Ham card and it looks amazing. Like I want this card, right? But Nebula's changed so many times. So everything in the data mine is subject to change. It gives us an insight what the developers are thinking, but they can and do change the cards multiple times. And Nebula is a good example of that. Each turn, your opponent doesn't play a card here, +2 power, except the turn you play this. So that's an example of card that has changed multiple times. So keep everything that we say here on unreleased cards with a grain of salt. Spider-Man 2099. Wow! Move decks are going to be amazing. The first time this moves to a location, destroy an enemy card there. What? Heimdall? Blowing up cards? This looks so good. We've got some, so both Spider-Man 2099 and Spider-Ham were found in the patch for today. So those are new finds. We've got some other cards that have been in the data mines for a while. And like I said, June is going to probably be Spider Month with the movie and everything, right? Into Spider-Verse 2. On reveal, this is for Ghost Spider, Spider-Gwen. Some people know her as Spider-Gwen, but it's Ghost Spider now. On reveal, move the last card you played here. Not entirely sure how that's going to play out, but that's interesting. And then we also have Silk, which is a 2/5. Wow. After any card is played here, this moves to another location. So she's going to be bouncing all over the place, but 2/5. Oh my God. And think about how many times that could trigger like Craven. It just seems so good. So move will have its day. There will be move decks. Move has been nuanced, predictable, but very interesting and powerful at times. But move will have its day for sure. Now, we're going to talk about the patch notes. First thing I want to say is that the following cards have dropped. So all of these cards here are now in Series 3. I think Bast is a very important card. We're going to talk about the changes to Shuri. I also think Valkyrie is an important card. And then going from Series 4 to Series 5, Stature, MODOK, and Ghost. I already have MODOK because that was a Battle Pass card, and I have limited interest in Stature and Ghost. But Bast is one of my personal favorites. I think Valkyrie's interesting. She really hasn't found a true home yet, in my opinion. And then Shuri will still be playable. We're going to talk about the changes to Shuri. So they changed the token shop, and it looks good. I'm very much a fan of this. Like you can see here is Jeff, and you can see I've already purchased him. Then we've got a rotational card right here, which is going to rotate between Series 4 and 5. And then right here will be an ultimate variant. So that'll be a cosmetic only. So this will be rotating And then this one right here will be the new Series 5 card that's purchasable for 6,000 tokens. That'll show up there weekly, and then it'll disappear after 6 days. Then there's still the Series 3 spot for you to get your free Series 3 spot. So that is fantastic. So let's talk about Shuri and what is going to happen. And we're also going to talk about some of the generic things that they've done. Also, players that reach infinite rank will only match against other infinite rank players. And then also, the people that were using Agatha to farm season past experience will only work 10 hours a day. So there was a way of using Agatha with an auto clicker to get a lot of extra season experience and just go like really high in the season thing. Well, they're limiting now that to 10 hours a day of gameplay. Balance updates, the part that we all want to know about. Shuri, on reveal, double the power of the next card you play. Now we'll say on reveal, if you play your next card here, double its power. When I first saw this, it was like, wow, this is going to limit effectiveness of Cosmo and the ability to perhaps do Arnim Zola. Let's read what they said, and then I'll talk about what decks I think are going to thrive after this. Considered a number of changes to Shuri, but they all tended to ruin her current decks. Some even theoretically risked making a new monster with different parts. That's not a great risk to running with balance, a problematically strong card. The change we're making today may seem small and subtle, but we expect to be impactful and retain the same flow of play for existing decks with the consistent goal of our balanced philosophy. The nerf removes Cosmo's protective capacity for her target and makes single card answers like Valkyrie easier to aim, and indirectly buff lanes control elements like Professor X. We're taking a risk here, and this nerf could leave Shuri still in a strength outlier. If so, react quickly. And so my first two thoughts is that Cosmo's not going to be a thing in Shuri decks, and Arnim Zola largely hasn't been. But I also thought maybe Sauron will have his day. Now, Sauron, the reason why people stopped playing Sauron is so that you could play Cosmo and armor. But there are versions of the Sauron deck that run armor, and they're very effective. So if you have Sauron, maybe consider this change right here. The biggest advantage to running Sauron is that you can run Ebony Maw instead of Titania. It's very powerful being able to play a 7 power 1-drop on turn 6. You also could play Typhoid Mary. So just keep this in mind. This might become a thing. Sauron might replace Shuri. We'll have to see what happens. I don't know if that many people have Sauron. Largely has been not worth it because how powerful Shuri was without, and you could play Cosmos. So maybe that will change going forward. Leech. Okay, so it is a nerf, but it also is a buff. Leech used to be on reveal. Now it is not an unreveal card. Basically, at the start of turn 6, remove all abilities from cards in your opponent's hand. So if you think about, people were often putting Leech into Lockjaw. Well, that won't work. Basically, Leech will have to be on the board for this to happen. And I've got a bunch of comments from the developers on how this is going to interact with some particular cards. Let's read the comments here first. It's never been our goal for Leech to be a heavily played card, and we understand that it's been a frustration lately. When it's happening, it usually means a finisher is typically strong against pure power like Leech later, and a deck can play Leech earlier than turn 5 too often, like Lockjaw Thanos. We tried in the past to weaken the stronger cards in those decks, but it's been a balance and design obstacle. Thus, we decided to remove the early Leech from the equation. So basically now Leech is going to be effective on turn 6, but turn 4 Leech, turn 5 Leech, yeah, it can go off, but the effect doesn't happen until turn 6. Leech is designed to counter some powerful in-game cards and combinations from Unuke's angle without any setup, which is important to have around in the event those decks begin to overperform. This change should let him fulfill that role while necessarily ever making him a foundational piece of the metagames. But it's not a non-reveal anymore. So there were some questions asked on Twitter. Does this mean the new Leech doesn't counter She-Hulk, since her cost will be set before Leech hits her? And they say no. While She-Hulk's calculation is a trigger, the cost reduction is applied passively, so Leech disables it. The other question that came up was about when does Leech trigger before the draw, and that is true. So the final card that you draw will still have their abilities. Let's move on and talk about Lockjaw. A lot of people are upset about this because basically it's just a straight up nerf to Lockjaw. Basically, it's once per turn now. Lockjaw is a fun, exciting card, but each trigger of this good boy basically draws a card and generates up to 6 energy at random. It's a lot of variance to have in multiple competitive decks. As we add cards, new and improved ways to sidestep Lockjaw's risk will also become available. So they're talking about this is limiting to their design and going forward, and they think it was going to be a problematic card when they build new cards. Since we believe the most powerful and frustrating use of Lockjaw trigger is in multiple times in a turn, often with a snap along the way, we're changing that, limiting Lockjaw to one swap each turn. Focus the player to develop their board without letting them sprint ahead or spring a late surprise. This makes Lockjaw simpler to play against and less potent in decks, incidentally playing a lot of cheap cards like Thanos. Okay. All right. We'll see how this plays, but this seems pretty heavy-handed, but I know a lot of people were wanting them to do something to Lockjaw before they did things to Moonstone. Maybe they'll revert Moonstone on Thanos. I don't know. America Chavez. Okay, so this is an interesting but subtle change. You always draw this card on turn 6 and not before, and then now it's going to be starts on the bottom of your deck. Draw this on turn 6. Now, it's interesting. Cable draws from the bottom of your deck. So if your opponent is playing Cable, they'll get your Chavez. And previously, if you were about to draw America Chavez, you would just draw your next card instead. This means that over the course of the game, she's more likely to be the top card of your deck. Thus, powerlessness is largely being unimportant outside of Yondu. And if you played Yondu, you notice that Yondu often got Chavez because she was on the top of the deck and she just wasn't being drawn until turn 6. So this is, in a way, a nerf to Yondu players, because Yondu players are typically running Null, and they would almost all, it seemed like a good percentage of times you would hit Chavez with Yondu because she was on the top of the deck. That's not going to happen anymore. But it does restrict your ability to print cards that interact with the top of your deck. We expect this update to have little impact on Chavez functionally overall. So this is a subtle nerf to basically Cable, and it's a subtle nerf to decks that run Yondu and Null. The reason why they're changing this is for 2 cards. Again, these are data mine cards subject to change. Howard the Duck, which is a card that's coming out here in the intermediate term. Tap this to see the top card of your deck, and then also Iron Lad. I think this card might be a Battle Pass card. We'll have to see. On reveal, copy the text of your deck's top card. So this is going to make, if Chavez was just on the top of your deck, that wouldn't be necessarily a desirable interaction with those 2 upcoming cards. Now, Jubilee, this is the way that Jubilee used to work. Jubilee used to be on reveal, add the top card of your deck to this location. They changed it specifically because of Chavez, if you remember back in the day. Some of our players may remember a time where Jubilee had this ability. Back then, Jubilee would often be a 4/10, and she pull Chavez very consistently. We decided at the time to change Jubilee's effect instead of Chavez, as the former was much simpler to change to communicate. However, we're looking to design cards that interact with the top of your deck in the future, which I just showcased. We're bringing this design back to expect to have little impact on Jubilee for the time being. This is true. Now, Leader. And I do think that Leader will be viable in certain types of decks, decks that run Wave, or decks that run Sandman. So Leader could have a resurgence. It is still a pretty significant nerf to the old version, What they massacred Leader and made him a weird version of Claw, and it was pretty drastic. And so they're going to revert him to a certain degree on reveal. Copy the enemy cards, plural, if they have the same power, with the highest power played this turn, but on your side. So if the cards have the same power, it'll copy multiple cards. We were clearly too harsh on Leader with his previous nerf, and we're dismayed that action became go-to example of how ruinous a nerf can be. Our balanced philosophy is to preserve as much of the playability as we reasonably can while weakening cards, and we didn't succeed here previously. With this change, we're aiming to bring his strength back up to a playable spot for a 6-card cost, but still avoid the oppressive impact on original form had. We erred on the cautious side with his power for now, but because some previous defense against the original Leader is playing weaker cards before a strong one no longer applies. So I actually see Leader with these changes that they're talking about here being played in Sandman decks, or maybe in decks that run Wave. So like, you typically play Wave on turn 5, soak up 2 energy into Sunspot, and then on the final turn, you play She-Hulk for 2, Death for 0, and then Leader, which copies with their card, and you're hoping your opponent can only play 1 card. So this could be very important in decks like Death Wave or Doom Wave, or there's a lot of or even a Sandman Leech deck. So hopefully this Leader was horrible. I mean, horrible. Leader before was like 6-4, copy all the cards, but on your side. It was ridiculous. So this becomes more situational, but still potentially powerful in those particular types of decks. A couple things. They noted a known issue with Quake on the way it works with Shuri. I haven't tested this, but it says Quake shuffling of locations can prevent Shuri's buff from being applied. And then also they mention a known issue with Quantum Realm doesn't reduce the power of cards that have their cost and power swapped. Specifically, that would be with Mr. Negative. Now, I just want to go over everything we already talked about and then talk about what's happening with Kitty. Long and short of it is that everybody is going to get a copy of Kitty Pryde for free a month from now. But they had to change the functionality of the way that Kitty works. And then they're going to reimburse the people that already purchased Kitty with 8,000 tokens and a Kitty Pryde avatar. So let's just read what they had to say. And then we're going to talk about, I've got several comments from the developers that answer questions on the functionality of Kitty, because it's still kind of confusing. Recent release of Kitty Pryde was a disaster, and will be compensating all players to thank you for your patience during the process. Shortly after the card was enabled on live servers, we saw reports of game-breaking issues. Yeah, I was playing against Arnold when he was using Kitty Pryde, and I got locked out of the game for 20 minutes. It was a disaster. Disabled the card from being played in any matches and being purchased in the token shop, and collected the collection level track until we could find a solution. Since then, we've been exploring fixes for Kitty Pryde's multiple issues. Yes, there were multiple issues. However, it didn't work right at all, basically. There was weird interactions with Beast and Collector, and it crashed the game. It crashed your opponent's game, which is even worse, right? You didn't even have to own Kitty, and you could be negatively impacted by Kitty just by playing somebody else that was playing Kitty. It was horrible. However, we found that in order to do so, it involved fundamental changes to our current game engine. Instead of modifying the entire game's rule set or re-releasing a partially bugged card, we're reworking Kitty design to satisfy her existing gameplay synergies and goals in a simpler way. In a lot of ways, she's not as good of a card. I don't think she's going to have like universal appeal like Sunspot or anything like that. She's going to be situational but powerful in decks that specifically run Beast, Angela, and Bishop. So the way she worked was that you had the option of returning her to your hand and getting 2 power. Now she basically always at the start of the turn goes back to your hand. And before we talk about when this returns your hand plus 2 power, the problem with this is that so the beginning of turn 6, she bounces back to your hand, and then you pay 1 mana and you replay her, right? Which means that she's basically not useful in most decks that want to play a 6-cost card. So if you're gonna play Kitty, no 6-cost cards. That's what that basically means. Because unless you just don't care about playing Kitty, you just don't play Kitty. She's basically a dead card and just goes back to your hand. Now it says when this returns to your hand. Now that is good because now she interacts better with like Beast and Falcon, and specifically Beast. When she goes back to your hand, then she becomes a 0-cost card. So this becomes an absolute no-brainer with Beast. So like on turn 3, Kitty was on the board. Kitty bounces back to your hand. You play Kitty for 1, and then you play Beast for 2, and then Kitty bounces back to your hand and now costs 0, and then you could use that for the rest of the turns without any additional mana. Amazing. So there's going to be a ton of useful situations with Beast, specifically with Angela and Bishop and Beast is the way I see it. And I think this is going to be a playable card in those circumstances. So she'll get play, but I don't see her being like a universally played card like Sunspot, just because like how, would you ever want to you would have negative synergy in theory with her and 6-cost cards. All right, let's read what else will they say. We need a bit more testing, verify that everything's functional as expected. Kitty Pryde, we're returning the game in the May patch, so we're about 4 weeks. We recognize there's been frustrating experience, especially with players who purchase Kitty Pryde. Then she's able to haven't had access to 6,000 tokens. So for the people that purchased Kitty, they will be getting 8,000 tokens and an avatar. And then all players will be getting the reworked Kitty Pryde for free. Now, before we wrap up the video, we're just going to talk about a couple comments that were made by the developers about Kitty. Is Kitty Pryde's interaction with Collector going to be fixed after the rework? Yes. All right, cool. So now Collector is going to work with her, right? Will Beast turn her into 0 cost when she's reworked? Also, will her interaction with Wave remain the same? Thanks for reading. So this is interesting because the answer to this part is yes, and then the reaction to this is no. Yes, Beast cost reduction will now stick. His effect will also give her 2 power. So basically Beast will make her 0. So the synergy, it's like Kitty plus Beast is a no-brainer, right? She will now cost 4 when Wave is active, as the reason she did before was that the game had not yet resolved her in your hand. Now she'll be there and subject to abilities affecting cards in your hand. Very important clarification because it worked differently before. And then lastly, hand management is going to be a problem with her because at the beginning of every turn, she comes back to your hand, right? So when do you draw cards? When do you be clogged? If you're clogged, she won't bounce back to your hand, with like the way that Luke's bar works. If you have a full hand of 7, she'll stay on the board. But the order of operations is interesting here because this is going to be a thing with her. Does Kitty return to your hand before or after the card you draw that turn? The rework Kitty returns your hand before you draw a card, but after the next location reveals if it's turn 2 or 3. So, if you have 6 cards in your hand, Kitty will come into your hand and then you won't be able to draw a card. If you have 7 cards in your hand, she'll stay on the board and you still won't be able to draw a card. So that's interesting, right? There's going to be hand management issues like there is already with bounced decks. So let me know what you think in the comment section. I, for one, am beyond hyped on this Spider Ham card. Wow, a 1-drop that could destroy Devil Dino? That basically, right? I'm pretty hyped about this. Hopefully this card stays in its current form. Let me know what you think in the comment section as always. Thanks for watching. Keep on gaming. Bye for now.